"You've been dismissed," she said, her voice syrupy smooth, sharpened just enough to slice through my spine. "Your services and your sad love aren't needed." The room didn't breathe. 15 board members. My board. Men and women I'd worked alongside for 31 years. Some of them looked at the table. A few shifted in their chairs. One cleared his throat, then stopped. I looked at her. Tailored navy suit, perfect posture, her father's old cufflinks flashing at her wrists like trophies. She stood at the head of the table, my spot. I'd built this company out of sleepless nights and half-eaten dinners, scraping together contracts in dusty conference rooms while she majored in European art history and perfected the wine smile she just used to fire me. At the meeting I called, I had come here to present our expansion into the Nordics. Years of market analysis, tech integration, soft launches, all of it primed and signed. But before I could even click the first slide, she stood, walked to the front, and said those words. "I've accepted the board's appointment as CEO." That line wasn't improvised. She'd practiced it, probably in the mirror, probably in the same mirror where I used to watch her put on mascara, humming out of tune. "I'll clear my office by morning," I said quietly. She tilted her head, the predator tilt. "Tonight." I smiled, and then I laughed, not loud, not manic, just amused, which unnerved her more than shouting ever could. It slipped through the cracks in her smirk and wedged itself in her jaw. She blinked twice. Somewhere in the back, someone coughed, loudly, uncomfortable. I pushed back my chair slowly, the leather groaning in protest, and stood up. You could feel the tension in the oak grain of that boardroom table. Every person in that room expected a tantrum, a speech, maybe even tears. Instead, I adjusted my watch, my father-in-law's old Patek Philippe, the one he gave me when we landed our first 8-figure client, and said, "You've always wanted this chair. I hope it's worth what it cost you." She opened her mouth, likely to gloat, but I was already walking out. And that, by the way, is where most people stop listening. They hear guy in his 60s gets blindsided by his wife at a board meeting, and they think it's some sad boomer drama, that I'd go cry into a tumbler of Glenlivet and start a travel blog. But no, because what happened next wasn't rage, it was chess. And if you've made it this far, do me a favor, subscribe. More than 90% of the people reading this don't. And yeah, it's free, but it tells the team that this kind of story's worth telling. That quiet men still have teeth. Back to the meeting. What no one noticed when I left the room was that I hadn't brought anything with me. Not my laptop, not my tablet, not my papers, not even my presentation folder. Because I didn't need them. Because everything important had already been moved, logged, initiated 6 months ago. She thought she'd engineered a coup, but all she did was trigger a sequence I set. And the clock had just started ticking. 6 months before the execution, I caught her practicing her betrayal, not in some dramatic way. There was no lipstick on a collar or burner phone in a hotel drawer. No, she was smarter than that. Calculated, surgical, and to the outside world, she was still supportive, the ever-loyal spouse who hosted holiday parties and called me darling when other people were around. But I noticed the pattern. First came the dinners. Networking, she called it. "You know how lonely David gets since his divorce," she'd say with that light laugh that could sterilize a room. It was always David, or Greg, or Elaine from compliance. Just casual drinks, wine pairings, her eyes landing right where influence lived. Then came the suggestions. She'd read board minutes I hadn't sent her, referenced compensation packages I'd never discussed. Once she corrected me mid-call about a vote total from a meeting I hadn't even told her I attended. She was fishing in my pond with a net she wasn't supposed to have, and the part that twisted something in my gut wasn't just the betrayal, it was the performance. How she'd sit across from me in the den, flipping through a magazine like she wasn't already gutting my influence one dinner at a time. I didn't confront her. I didn't ask. Instead, I waited. I started with Arthur, our original seed investor, 84 years old, wears bow ties and still reads the Wall Street Journal with a magnifying glass. He knew me before I had a payroll, before I had her. He once told me, "Any man can build a company, but only a few can protect it from ambition and heels." I took him to breakfast at his usual place, a greasy spoon where the waitress calls him sugar. I laid out what I suspected. He didn't ask for evidence. He just said, "Well, Then it's time, isn't it? Then came Priya, our compliance watchdog from Mumbai. She and I had once spent 18 hours together rewriting our IP structure in a windowless conference room during a regulatory scare. She was precise, loyal, and allergic to people like my wife. With their backing, I did what she would never expect from me. I rewrote the rules, specifically Clause 9.3 of our internal charter, voting adjustment for trust stakeholders. You see, when we hit our Series C, I'd quietly moved a chunk of shares into a family trust. Back then, it was to protect assets during a possible acquisition, but I buried a provision, legal, unnoticed, and just waiting to be fed oxygen. The clause allowed for temporary voting reallocation if both legacy stakeholders on record approved an emergency leadership review. Guess who those stakeholders were? Arthur and Priya. It took 3 signatures and 2 notaries. The result? A latent silent majority. Technically, I was still outvoted on paper, on record, publicly, but in reality, I held 56.2% of reweighted voting control if I chose to activate it. One press of a button, one call to legal, and the board structure would invert. Quietly. Completely. But I didn't press it. Not yet. Because letting her win, thinking she'd won, was part of the strategy. The illusion of power is often more corrupting than power itself, and I needed her to feel invincible. Needed her arrogance to expose itself, to grow bold and sloppy. She'd been playing the room for months, convinced she was the smartest person in it. She didn't realize the votes had already been counted. She was playing poker with a rigged deck, and she was too busy gloating to notice the cards never changed. What I felt in those moments wasn't rage. It was restraint, a kind of cruel patience I didn't know I had, because this wasn't about revenge, not yet. This was about letting the storm build. So when the thunder finally came, she'd have no shelter left. She showed up in white, of course she did, a winter white pantsuit with gold cufflinks and red bottom heels that clacked across the marble like a gavel. Her hair was pulled back in that power knot she always wore when she needed to feel dangerous, like the first day she fired someone, or the last day she told me she loved me. I watched the security feed from a private stream, one of those founder privileges nobody thought to deactivate. She waltzed into the lobby like a conquering general, pausing just long enough to wave to Barbara at reception. Barbara didn't wave back. First stop, my nameplate. She pulled it from the wall outside the executive suite like it offended her, snapped a photo with it like a hunter beside a trophy buck, then handed it to an intern who didn't look old enough to drive. Then came the photo. It was taken in 1991. I was 28, standing next to our first prototype. A younger, sweatier me, holding up a circuit board and grinning like an idiot. That photo had been framed in the lobby since the lease was signed, a kind of unofficial timestamp on everything that came after. She pointed at it and said, "Take that down. It's not the look we're going for." "Ma'am?" the facilities guy asked. She didn't repeat herself. Just walked off. She didn't notice him hesitate, didn't hear him whisper, "It's his building," under his breath. She was too busy making a call. HR picked up on the second ring. "I want Rachel reassigned," she said, already turning down the hallway. "She's too loyal." Rachel had been my assistant for 11 years, knew my calendar better than I did, knew my ex-wife's favorite wine, knew when to reschedule and when to let the silence ring. In short, Rachel was a threat. So naturally she had to go. After that, the press release. I didn't even need to read it. I knew the quote before it hit the wire. "The future belongs to bold leadership." She probably practiced that one in the shower, probably said it to herself in the car on the way over. Bold, as if firing the person who founded the company she now ran by marriage made her some kind of visionary. She was still glowing with it, triumph, giddy and blinding. When the knock came, 3 quick raps on the glass wall of her new office. Legal, specifically Alan, our chief counsel, 40 years in corporate law, doesn't speak unless there's a comma missing or a lawsuit coming. He was holding a folder, plain black, slim, no label. She didn't look up from her phone. "Later," she said. Alan didn't blink. "It's time sensitive." She waved him off. "Add it to the pile." He stared at her for a second longer than protocol allowed, then placed the folder gently on the edge of the desk and left without a word. She never opened it. And in that moment, smiling at congratulatory text too high on her own elevation to smell the smoke, she missed what was really happening. Because inside that folder was the updated corporate charter with Clause 9.3 signed, stamped, filed. It was the legal equivalent of a tripwire, and her heel was already mid-step. She spent the rest of the day rearranging furniture, barking orders, telling an interior designer over the phone to remove anything that looks like a shrine to my ex. I imagine she kicked her feet up that evening, glass of Sauvignon Blanc in hand, watching the online reactions to the press release roll in. She thought the kingdom was hers. She never noticed that the foundation was already missing, that the walls were just shadows waiting for the wind. And she had no idea that the clock, my clock, had already started ticking, loud, precise, and terminal. The branch I drove to wasn't downtown. No glass towers or parking garages, just an old two-story brick building nestled between a dry cleaner and a diner that still sold coffee for $1. The teller knew me by name. Everyone there did. It was deliberate. See, the main branch had too many eyes, too much glass, too many assistants who'd text her the second they saw me walk in. This place had linoleum floors and a branch manager who still used a Rolodex, which made it perfect. I walked in with a leather briefcase, the same one I carried to our first investor pitch, back when I still believed in the myth of ours, back when I thought success would bring us closer, not carve us into factions. Inside the case, one notarized packet, already signed, time-stamped, and pre-verified by legal. All it needed now was one handover. The trust was called Caldwell Growth Reserve. A quiet name. Boring even. That's the point. It was formed 11 years ago during a tax optimization phase, tucked inside our joint estate plan, disguised as a mechanism for deferred disbursement in case of catastrophic succession. She never read the fine print. She thought it was a backup vault, just a placeholder for future dividends. What she didn't realize was that 2 years ago, I'd restructured the trust to include a clause. In the event of contested leadership or internal displacement, the trust gains activating rights and immediate voting transfer to the founder or his designated proxy. In plain English, I could activate 22% voting power with a single document. And I just did. I slid the envelope across the desk. The teller took it, opened it, scanned the signature page, and nodded once, then stood up and disappeared into the back office. It took 17 minutes. I spent those minutes sipping stale coffee and staring at the community bulletin board. Guitar lessons, a lost tabby cat, a church raffle for a used lawnmower. No one recognized that in that moment the tectonics of a $300 million company were shifting from a cracked folding chair in a neighborhood branch. When the teller returned, she handed me a receipt and smiled. "It's done, Mr. Caldwell. Anything else we can help with?" I shook my head. "You've helped more than you know." I walked out lighter, not emotionally, strategically, because what that one move did, quietly, without fireworks, was reduce her stake from a perceived 51% down to 29%. She didn't know yet. She still believed she owned the majority. But the second she fired me, the second she made it public and signed her own name onto the CEO chair, everything activated. And now every decision she made was hanging by a thread she didn't know existed. Back at the office, she was probably mid-conference call, trying to bully legal into letting her reassign my parking spot, or demanding a redesign of the annual report cover, something petty, something she thought signaled control. But control had shifted, and when she finally noticed the walls creaking, when her votes started falling short, her motions delayed, her board support evaporating one nod at a time, she'd panic. She'd scramble for spreadsheets, hunt for missing shares, blame advisors, accuse departments, and none of it would matter, because the ownership was never hers to begin with. She wore the crown. I owned the castle, and I had just changed the locks. She called it a necessary precaution. A full company forensic audit launched under the guise of transparency, but everyone knew what it really was, a witch hunt. She told the press it was about accountability in a new era. She told the board it was to uncover any residual mismanagement. And she told herself loudly to anyone who'd listen that it was because she suspected I'd hidden funds, siphoned assets, buried cash reserves like a petty warlord preparing for exile. The truth? She needed a villain, a distraction. Something to explain the cracks already spiderwebbing through her control. The drop in morale, the 2 clients who'd quietly paused contracts, The board member who stopped replying to her emails but met with Arthur twice in 1 week. And more urgently, she needed to find something, anything, she could weaponize against me. So she greenlit a full-scale audit, gave the forensic team unrestricted access to our internal systems, historical records, departmental budgets, legacy accounts. She even made it public. A company-wide email subject line, "We're opening the books." She thought it was a power move. What she didn't realize was that some books don't belong to her. 3 weeks in, the audit was crawling through finance. Most of it was routine, sloppy expense filings, outdated vendor contracts, a duplicate line item or two, nothing malicious, nothing illegal, until they opened the cabinet. It sat behind a faux wall panel, one of those things you forget exists until someone leans on it. The head of finance had no idea it was even there. Neither did the junior analyst combing through records. It was the lead forensic accountant, Roger Sims, suit always a size too big, eyes like burnt-out light bulbs, who found the latch. He didn't shout, didn't call for backup. He opened the door, saw the black binders inside, and went very, very still. There were 3, labeled in plain block text, Executive Contingency Plan, Founder Only. Roger pulled the first binder and opened it on the nearest desk. It wasn't notes. It wasn't draft budgets. It was a sealed legal document, signed, notarized, time-stamped 3 years ago, co-signed, and the signature beside mine wasn't hers. It was her father's. The real founder. The real architect of everything. There was a clause in his handwriting, annotated, initialed, that granted me contingency control over long-term executive operations in the event of instability, compromise, or deviation from original governance values. Her firing me? It triggered the contingency, the financial handover, the audit keys, the dormant permissions embedded into the accounting software, the ones no one had touched since 2018. Roger closed the binder, stared at the signature again, checked it twice, then checked the timestamp on the internal audit approval, the one she signed. He walked, slowly, to the elevator and rode it to the 12th floor. Her office had glass walls. She was mid-conversation, probably performing dominance for some poor vendor. He knocked once, held up the binder. She waved him in, still on the call. "1 second, Roger. Can it wait?" "No," he said, voice dry. "You should see this now." She hung up. Annoyed, rolled her eyes. He laid the binder in front of her, opened it to the co-signed page, and said, "Ma'am, you authorized this audit?" "Yes," she said without looking. "Why?" He turned the binder toward her, tapped the signature line. It took her a moment. Her lips parted just slightly. Then she said, That's not me." "No," Roger said, "it's not." She stared at her father's name, the elegant curl of his C, the legal validity of a signature she couldn't argue with. She tried to speak, tried again, but the sentence never came, because it dawned on her in that exact moment that she hadn't opened the books. She'd opened a vault, and the only person with the key was the one she tried to erase. The audit didn't uncover my sabotage. It uncovered my insurance policy, and she signed the trigger herself. By the second month, she was no longer playing CEO. She was performing tyranny. The memos started arriving in rapid bursts, always laced with corporate anesthesia: streamline, restructure, reallocate. But the message between the lines was clear: you're disposable. Department heads were blindsided with 30-minute notices. Whole teams vanished over the weekend. I'd walk by the building, never in, just near, and see their desks boxed up through the tinted glass, names stripped off the doors like they were errors being corrected. She called it optimization. The irony? It was the same word we used back in '97 when we saved the company from collapse by cutting my salary for 9 months. But now, in her mouth, it wasn't survival, it was control. HR turned into a revolving door. One poor guy lasted 12 days. He quit after she screamed at him in front of the break room because someone used Caldwell & Co. instead of Caldwell Leadership Group on a marketing packet. Semantics. She made it blood. Staff lunches were canceled. PTO requests stalled. And worst of all, she killed Maker Day, the once-a-year tradition where every employee, regardless of title, pitched their own product ideas. It was my favorite day of the year. She called it a waste of bandwidth. People stopped smiling. Then they started whispering. At first it was quiet. 2 employees in the copy room. A Slack DM here, a hallway glance there. She's not like him. I miss how it used to be. What happened to the founder? They didn't dare say my name, not yet. But it lived under their tongues, a shared password among the disillusioned. 1 week later, I got the first call. It was Rajiv, a partner from our largest long-term client, and a man who never wasted syllables. "Why did you leave, Dilla?" he asked. I didn't answer. He sighed. "She's tanking the relationship. Every call's a war zone. I thought you'd step down. But now?" I let the silence do the talking. He said, the funny thing is, no one's buying the new era line. The only thing bold about her leadership is how fast morale evaporated. 2 days later, I got another call, then another, then an email, then a lunch invitation from a client who had never once requested my time in 20 years. The narrative was slipping through her fingers, and she didn't even realize it. Until the leak, it wasn't a spreadsheet or a damning audio clip. It was worse, an internal memo, plain, routine, on official letterhead. It outlined the planned layoffs for Q3 and used language even sharks would call tone deaf. Legacy employees are emotionally inefficient. The phrase exploded. It hit the press first through a back channel. The reporter credited a concerned senior partner within the organization. The headline dropped at 8:43 a.m. Hostile CEO ousts founder in power grab. Now targets staff. By 9:17 a.m., it was on the front page of every relevant industry newsletter. By noon, it was viral. She tried to spin it, called it taken out of context, accused the press of bias, called the leak a betrayal of internal trust. But no one was listening to her anymore. They were quoting me, not because I spoke, but because I didn't, because my silence felt more credible than her noise. And that's when the shift happened. The narrative, once hers, curated and photoshopped, turned cold. Employees stopped attending her Q&As, emails stopped being replied to, board members missed meetings. Arthur's health issues mysteriously vanished the moment she proposed a new bonus structure. Every leader knows when the air changes. It's not loud, it's not sudden, it's a breeze at first, then a draft. Then one morning, you realize no one's facing your direction. She still sat in the big chair, still signed the memos, still barked at interns, but the empire she thought she ruled, it was already gone, and it was whispering my name. The meeting was called under her authority. Technically, the subject line read, Emergency Board Session, Strategic Direction Review. She picked the time, 7:30 a.m., to catch everyone off guard, to assert that breathless alpha tone she'd been clinging to like a drowning swimmer. Her assistant sent the invites. Her new assistant, that is, number 4 in 6 weeks. She thought she was walking into a war room. She didn't realize it was a trial. The boardroom was quiet when she entered, holding a double espresso in one hand and a stack of briefing notes in the other. Her blazer was crisp, her eyes narrowed, her smile that sharp politician's curve she'd practiced in bathroom mirrors since her PR pivot. She took the head seat again, my seat once, and greeted the room with that fake warmth she deployed when she was nervous. "Thanks for coming on short notice," she began. "We have a lot to—" "Let's begin," Arthur cut in. No smile, no preamble, just a flat statement that folded her opening like tissue paper. She blinked, then laughed lightly as if it were a misunderstanding. "Arthur, I think we should start with the recent quarterlies. I've prepared a report." "No," Priya said from the far end of the table, sliding a folder forward. "This session isn't about projections. It's about leadership perception and fiduciary tone." A long silence followed. She straightened in her chair. "Excuse me?" "You're excused," Arthur muttered. My cue. I stepped into the room then. Not late, not early, just precise. The door clicked softly behind me. I didn't say a word, didn't need to. I walked around the table and took the seat 2 spots down from hers, deliberately not across, not opposite, flanking her. A presence, not a threat. Her eyes flicked to me wide for half a second, then narrowed. "This is a closed executive session," she said, voice sharp. Arthur spoke without looking at her. David holds activated voting proxy as designated trustee, ratified by Clause 9.3, signed 3 years prior under joint charter governance. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. That's not possible. Shall we vote? Priya asked calmly. What exactly are you voting on? She snapped, voice rising. You can't just... Arthur read from the agenda, crisp and cold. Motion to remove Ms. Caldwell as acting CEO, citing deterioration in leadership perception, breach of fiduciary tone, reputational harm, and structural destabilization. I called this meeting, she barked, half standing. And we appreciate the invitation, Priya said, not looking up. The vote began. First Arthur. Aye, then Priya. Aye, then Michael, head of product development. Aye, then Linda from operations. Aye, one by one. She kept glancing at them, at me, back at them. Each vote was a cut she hadn't prepared for. It reached 5, then 6, then 7, only 4 nays. 2 from newer members she'd courted with dinners and promises, 1 from legal, who looked physically ill. Abstention. And that was it. Arthur folded his hands. Motion passes. 7-4. He looked directly at her for the first time all morning. Effective immediately, Ms. Caldwell is removed as acting CEO. The chair didn't feel so comfortable anymore. Her breath caught in her throat, just barely audible. No, this is a setup. David put you up to this. You're all being manipulated. You can't just erase me. But no one was looking at her anymore. They were looking at the future, one she no longer had a seat in. And for the first time since she stole my company in front of a dozen men who once toasted our wedding, she was the one walking out of a room full of eyes, and none of them followed her. She didn't walk out of the boardroom. She detonated her way out. The glass wall trembled when she slammed the door. Her heel snapped, literally, and she didn't even stop to fix it, hobbling down the hallway like Fury in a skirt suit. The interns scattered. Her assistant dropped a coffee and pretended not to exist. She didn't take the elevator. She stormed down 12 flights of stairs. By the time she reached the lobby, she was already on the phone. Her attorney, Miles Thorne, freshly poached from a boutique white shoe firm with a thing for crisis containment, answered on the first ring. File a grievance, she barked before he could even say hello. Emergency injunction, breach of fiduciary duty, abuse of trust authority. He manipulated the board vote. Use whatever words you need to. Just file something. Miles was quiet for 2 beats longer than a good attorney should be. I'm not sure that's how you want to play this, he said cautiously. Do it. He did. To his credit, the filing was fast, elegant, even dramatic. There were buzzwords like predatory restructuring and strategic deception, the sort of thing that makes business journalists salivate. She had it couriered directly to the office an hour later, knowing full well I'd still be there. It was posturing, of course, a last gasp in a room that no longer had oxygen. My team didn't flinch. We'd been waiting for this exact play. I forwarded the grievance to James, my estate attorney, a man who looked like a substitute teacher and wrote contracts like military ambushes. His reply took less than 15 minutes. It was 1 page, a single clause, from our prenuptial agreement, Section 14B. In the event that one spouse terminates the other from a shared co-founded entity, and that termination is overturned or reversed by governing authority, said initiating spouse forfeits all stock options, trust rights, and deferred equity, effective immediately. There was a notarized timestamp, dated 5 years ago. The ink wasn't even faded. She never read the addendum. Of course she didn't. Back then, we were partners. We'd just closed Series D. She was busy planning a yacht party and trying to decide whether we needed a private chef or if Postmates was enough. I remember the conversation. I told her it was just a revision for worst-case scenarios. She kissed me and said, "You worry too much." Apparently I didn't. We had it served to Miles by hand. He read it twice, called her, asked her if she remembered it. She didn't. "No, there's no way I signed that. David added it later. He must have." "No, ma'am, it's initialed. By you. In blue ink. And the notary stamp is clean. I want to contest it." He didn't answer right away. Then, "It's airtight." Silence. Then she screamed, Not metaphorically, not whispered rage. She screamed in her car in the parking garage, loud enough for someone to call building security. She kicked the inside of her Tesla so hard it cracked the console, punched the dashboard. Her voice broke mid-yell, something about liars and thieves and I made this company, but legally, she'd just erased herself. With one signed clause she never bothered to read, she hadn't just lost her title, she'd lost everything. Her shares? Gone. Her equity in the trust? Voided. Her deferred performance bonuses? Liquidated. And her voting power? Dead as the pen she used to scribble her initials next to mine 5 years and one universe ago. She thought the reversal would be her comeback. Instead, it was the trigger, the one that turned her from CEO to civilian in a single paragraph. We didn't have to sue her. We didn't even have to raise our voices. She swung the axe, she just didn't know where the blade was pointing. She came in through the front doors like she still owned the building. Hair tight, heels sharper than memory, lips pressed into that executive line she always wore when she needed to look unbothered. It was all theater now. Costume over consequence. The security camera caught the flicker in her step when the motion doors lagged just a beat longer than usual, like even the building was considering whether to let her in. The receptionist, Barbara, 30 years and counting, looked up. "Good morning, Ms. Called." She cut her off. "I'm here to collect my things." Barbara didn't smile, didn't nod, just picked up the phone and dialed an internal line. A pause. "Yes, she's here," Barbara said. Another pause, then, "Understood." She hung up, looked at her with a look that wasn't pity, wasn't triumph, just a quiet kind of mourning, the look people give abandoned chairs at funerals. "Someone will escort you up." A few seconds later, 2 security officers appeared. Professional, courteous, emotionless. She scowled. "Is this necessary?" One of them motioned toward the elevator. "We've been instructed to accompany you." Her jaw tightened, but she walked. They rode up in silence. She didn't face them. Didn't look at the mirrored wall either, just stared at the elevator doors, like maybe if she glared hard enough the world would reverse itself. But when they opened, when the doors finally slid back onto the 12th floor, everything she'd tried to bury stared back at her. The lobby had changed, subtle but intentional. The walls had been repainted. The minimalist prints she'd installed, those generic corporate pieces about innovation and courage, were gone. In their place was one thing, one image, a single portrait, freshly mounted and framed in matte black. It was him, me, taken 6 weeks prior, after the board vote. No filters, no Photoshop, just me, standing in the server room where it all began. Hands in pockets, expression quiet, the original logo faintly glowing behind me. Below it, a brass plaque. David Caldwell, founder, 1987, present, legacy unbroken. She stopped walking, dead still. The security officers didn't speak. She stared at the plaque like it was mocking her. Maybe it was. She reached into her purse, pulled out her keycard, like muscle memory had tricked her into thinking she still had access. She tapped it against the glass panel. Red again, nothing. One of the guards cleared his throat. "Access was revoked last Friday." Of course it was. She didn't say anything, just slipped the card back into her bag like she might still need it, like it wasn't just a plastic relic of the person she used to be. "Do you want help packing your things?" the other officer asked. She shook her head, walked forward, past the portrait. She didn't look up this time. Couldn't. The tears came at the far end of the hallway, just before the door to the office that used to be hers. Soft at first, controlled, just a tight breath, a twitch at the corner of her eye. Then the sound cracked. It wasn't a sob. Not quite. Just a broken inhale. The kind that takes with it whatever pride was left. Because it wasn't just the title that was gone. It was the presence. The imprint. She hadn't been fired. She'd been erased. And the building, the one she tried to claim, no longer remembered her name. The office was quiet again. Not dead. Alive in a different way. Focused. Awake. No more echoing heels. No more performative slamming of doors. No tension curling under every memo. Just quiet voices, purposeful steps, breathing room. I walked in early, Unlocked the door myself and flipped the switch. The lights hummed like they used to, like they remembered. The smell of fresh carpet cleaner still lingered from whatever frantic staging she'd tried during her takeover. Cheap cologne sprayed over rot. But the rot was gone now, and I was back. My name was already on the door again. Different font this time. No serif, clean, direct. I sat down in the chair, my chair, and leaned back slowly, letting it creak. Same chair she'd once called Too Old Man. Same one she tried to have replaced with some absurd ergonomic monstrosity shaped like a question mark. I opened the top drawer. It hadn't been touched. That told me everything I needed to know about the people still here. Inside was a small Polaroid, our first day in this office. Before the renovations, before the expansions, before ambition became poison, just her and me, standing in front of the empty whiteboard, arms around each other, grinning like fools. Her eyes sparkled in that way they used to before boardrooms and press releases dulled them down. I set it on the desk, not out of nostalgia, out of memory. Then I picked up the phone. "Activate the succession plan," I said. "Effective immediately. We're promoting Alex." A pause on the line, then a slow exhale. "Yes, sir. He's ready." Our son had been in the background the whole time, watching, learning, not loud, not entitled, just there quietly earning the trust of people who matter, people she never noticed because they didn't wear designer shoes or talk in hashtags. He didn't want the role, not at first, but now he understood the weight of legacy, and more importantly, he understood why it needed protecting. I hung up the phone and leaned back. Outside the window, the city churned, unaware that anything had changed, but something had. Meanwhile, across town, in a beige apartment she never expected to step foot in, let alone live in, she sat on a second-hand couch, staring at the television. No makeup, no assistance, just her, a bottle of Pinot, and the slow erosion of her former life. The morning news anchor was grinning wide. And in breaking headlines this morning, David Caldwell has officially been restored to his position as company founder following an internal reversal vote. In an unprecedented move, the company also announced his successor, Alex Caldwell, marking the start of a multi-generational leadership transition. A statement from the board praised the return to foundational values. She muted it, not because she couldn't bear to hear it, because she'd already heard it too many times in her head. The remote trembled in her hand. Not from rage, from finality. She turned her eyes to the kitchen counter. The eviction notice lay open, folded once but not enough to hide the red stamp. 30 days. The apartment had been part of her private assets, the ones she tried to preserve when the equity fell through. But the math never favored desperation. The moment the stock options were voided, the spiral started. Quiet, brutal. And now it was all she had. She picked up her phone, scrolled through her contacts, paused on David, hovered, deleted. Outside, somewhere miles away, a new plaque was being installed outside the conference room. Founder restored, legacy secured, future in good hands. She would never see it. She wouldn't be invited back, not even as a guest. And in the silence of her apartment, with the curtains still closed and the wine uncorked since last night, she realized something with cold clarity. The next morning wasn't fun. It was justice.